It's my pleasure, it's my honor to introduce to you Phil Haney.
Because that's how I felt a lot of the time in my service in the U.S. government, right in the middle of a big storm. Now, we're going to go real fast through this, and don't worry about the detail. We can work on getting you a copy of it. But the point is, I picked one particular thing from each year, starting with 9/11/2001, to show you how this progression of what we call today countering violent extremism. Don't be shy. How many people have never heard of it? Good. Most of us have, because that's the policy that drives not only domestic counterterrorism, but foreign policy as well. In foreign policy terms, it's usually called engagement in dialogue. Here in America, it's called CVE, but it's exactly the same policy. So starting in 2001, Ashcroft met with Muslim and Arab leaders, and the main concern they had was down at the bottom about their civil rights and civil liberties. Well, that's fine. We should all be concerned about civil rights and civil liberties. Except for, as you'll see as we go through, this civil rights and civil liberties policy didn't stop with just American citizens. Somewhere along the line, it got extended to foreign nationals. And you heard a lot of that lately with the San Bernardino issues with the visa vetting and the visa wavering and the people coming and the people going. Well, it has to do with this. And you also remember with the social media. The big argument in the media a couple of weeks ago about whether DHS had the right to examine social media. That was of people who were foreign nationals. Somewhere along the line, this administration extended American-style civil rights and civil liberties essentially to everybody on the face of the earth. So this is 2001. 2002, we have a joint Arab-American, Muslim-American statement. And in particular, there's a couple groups down here that are going to emerge out later. And again, apologize, you can't see it close. But the point is not the detail, it's the time sequence. These groups that were cooperating originally with the government subsequently became named in the Holy Land Foundation trial as direct affiliates of Hamas. We already knew in 2001 that Hamas was a terrorist organization and that these groups were affiliated with it, but it took a couple more years, actually a few more years, before they were officially designated as unindicted co-conspirators. 2003, we have the FBI director meeting with Muslim, Sikh, and Arab American leaders. And the way this progression works is like leaven in bread. It starts out with just a little bit, and all of a sudden the bread is getting bigger and bigger, and it just doesn't seem to ever stop, because enough is never enough. As soon as one concession is made, the famous saying, the nose of the camel under the tent, then the neck is in, and then the whole body, and it never stops. And that's what I'm showing you is the initial seeds, the very innocent-looking beginning. What's wrong with civil rights and civil liberties dialogue? But as you'll see, time goes on, it gets to the point where it doesn't seem like the government can tell the difference between its right hand and its left hand. And then people like myself who kept trying to say, wait a minute, this is not a good idea, these people are not our enemies, were pushed out. This is just another part of the same story. So then we come up to 4. Department of Justice reinforces commitment to working with leaders of Muslim, Sikh, and Arab American communities. Now by this time, 2004, DHS has already stood up. And people like me with the background in the Middle East and Middle Eastern languages and what I call the strategy and the tactics of the global Islamic movement are already starting to say, we're sending intel reports up the chain. This is a problem. These people do not have our welfare in mind. If you study Quranic theology, you can tell just by the words they use, even in a secular language, that they don't have good intent. How many people have heard the word Islamophobia? Islamophobia is actually an Islamic doctrine. And this is the part they won't tell you. Would you agree that if I characterize Islamophobia, one of the things I could do to illustrate it, paint a word picture, would be put my hand like this and say stop, right? You can't come any further. I would be accused of Islamophobia, correct? Standing in the way of the progress in the civil rights, etc., free expression of the Muslim community. But there's a concept in the Quran. It's not called Islamophobia. It's called fitna. Fitna means opposition to, it means oppression, it means resistance, it means interference with, it means a whole lot of different things. But when you stand in the way of the progress of Islam, that is called fitna. In the secular context, it's called Islamophobia. But from a Quranic perspective, it's not a secular political term. It is a Quranic term. And there are what I call operative verbs attached to that action, that when you do this, they are Quranically authorized to respond to you in what I call operative verbs. They are the most violent verbs in the entire Quran, infinitely more violent than the word jihad. We've heard jihad a million times. The words that I'm referring to are called betel, means slaughter, and courage, which means push away. Those verbs are best illustrated in the allegory of an IED. What is an IED? It blows the truck off the road. That's courage. It kills the people inside of the truck. That's betel. And the very fact that it's on the road at all, period, is the fitna. So an IED is a perfect illustration, and that's what they're authorized to do vis-a-vis Quranic strategy and tactics. That's Islamophobia. 2005, state justice will appear at impact causing concern. By now it's starting to break out into the open. There are people in NGOs and non-law enforcement community specialists in strategy and tactics and the Jihad movement are saying, wait a minute, these groups are known front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. Impact was founded by the Hathout brothers from Orange County, California, who were both avowed members of the Muslim Brotherhood. And to this very day, by the way, Impact, they just gave Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, a performance award. He's pictured with the guy on the stage. This is my boss until I retired. And they talk about the morale within DHS being low. Well, those are the reasons why. If you have a boss who's actually literally standing in public and having pictures taken with people that you know are affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, then how are you supposed to respond if you're a law enforcement officer who's taken a vow? And that's why I became a whistleblower.
Thank you.
Because when you do this, if you're a man of integrity or a woman of integrity, you can never do this again. I'm retired, but my vow is not retired. Now I go where my vow will take me. I'm going along with it because I took it and it never will retire. So I'm in this to the end. I have hope, by the way. I think any of you that have seen me talking on TV or on the radio know that I have hope. This thing is fixable. We can't address it. We're Americans. We have the ability and the capability and the tools to do it. If we're just allowed to do it. Take the handcuffs off of law enforcement and the military and let us do our job, and we're more than fully capable of doing it. And there's all kinds of my colleagues that are still activities going, go, go man, go. You finally made it. Thank God somebody's standing up for us, because they're desperate, I'll tell you, to do their job. They want to. A lot of these guys are half my age. They're the ones that kick down the doors. I always joke with them, you guys, I'm too old to kick the doors down. I'll show you where the doors, you guys go kick them in, and then I'll come and take the photo op and when we break the case. So this is 2.5. Things are progressing along. Then we come to 2006. Muslim and Arab leaders meet with FBI on domestic surveillance reports. Remember about the camel? It's not just civil rights anymore. Now they're intruding themselves into the entire law enforcement arena. They're complaining about surveillance. A lot of that happened right here in New York City. It's an ongoing issue with the surveillance, quote-unquote, surveillance program in New York City. Well, these same groups, by now, 2006, were on the verge of identifying them as Holy Land co-conspirators. They already know who they are. If I could set my computer up and just magically download the information that we have in our law enforcement system and then give you a Vulcan mind meld so you could sit there in that chair, you could find derogatory information on these organizations within 15 to 20 seconds. It's that simple. It's no harder than sending a text on your phone. You just have to know how to do it. It's all right there. And again, we're talking about countering violent extremism. Not fighting the war on terror. That was gone a long time ago. Not identifying the nature of the threat on fact-based analysis, because after all, they have to tell you what they intend to do. When Osama bin Laden bombed the embassy in Tanzania, he was not criticized for bombing it. He was criticized for not offering them to convert to Islam first. It's called dawah. That's not what they were upset about. And once he got that lesson straightened out, you notice that no one ever criticized him in the Islamic world again for breach of Sharia law protocol. It wasn't the fact that he bombed them, it was that he didn't offer them to come to Islam first. And that's why he issued his fatwa, inviting the West to come to Islam. Because at that point, his obligation was done. 07, MPAC meets with DHS Secretary Chertoff and FBI Director Mueller. Now we're at the point, everything that I show you from now on, there is no excuse for. Why? Because the Holy Land trial. That was a point of mark. They were already designated in 07. The trial didn't end successfully till 08. However, the trial was ongoing at this point. These people knew. They had to know. If they didn't know, then they're incompetent. If they did know, then what is that? Some sort of different malevolency, isn't it? A deliberate ignorance of the truth. They had to know. These are the top leaders of law enforcement in our country. And they're meeting with the very same people that the Justice Department has on trial in Texas at exactly the same time. That's like bringing John Gotti in and putting on the Mafia Control Commission for New York City. And then them saying that they didn't know it. And here's a real turning point right here. This is one of the congressmen who's asking for them, Pete Hoekstra and Sue Myrick, to look at these groups. This wasn't just a passive engagement. There were people in all the different branches of the executive and judicial branch of the government that were trying to find a way to notify, to stop it. And then this is the real big one right here. This is a super turning point. This is the Words Matter memo. How many have heard of the Words Matter memo? Well, you have now. And you read this, sir. We call it the Words Matter memo simply because the first two words of the memo are Words Matter. And it's son of a gun, they do. Like those words that I just told you, Bethel and courage, they matter, don't they? Because that's driving, that's the gravitational force of the strategy and tactics of the global Islamic movement. Words certainly do matter. If I knew your name and I called your first name, you would immediately turn to me because you know your name and you hear it, you respond to it. Words matter. Words are important. But yet we were told here, and we're getting into the realm of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party now, except that they have real guns. Because they're telling us that words matter, but there are certain words that you can't use, you can't discuss. And this is where the submarine came out of the water. People with the sonar equipment were telling the captain of the ship there's something way down below us that's really big. And essentially the captain said, don't worry about it, it's nothing, don't be concerned. And then all of a sudden the submarine surfaces. And oh my God, it's an enormously large submarine. This this right here. This is when it's actually beginning to surface into the visible view of U.S. policy, called the Words Matter. Then we have this FBI. The President's Pledge for a New Beginning between the U.S. and the Muslim community takes root here, where? In the Justice Department. This has to do with President Obama's June 4th, 2009 speech in Cairo. Al-Azhar University, the center of the Sunni world, that is going to be driven out of the Justice Department, where we are committed to using criminal and civil rights laws to protect Americans. They did, too, against me. They convened a grand jury and sought probable cause to indict me on criminal charges. This was in 2009. This happened in 2014. So a few years later, they were true to their word. They did start going after people who were, quote unquote, violating the civil rights of the American Muslims. Top priority of this Justice Department is return to robust civil rights enforcement and outreach in defending religious freedom and other fundamental rights of all of our fellow citizens in the workplace, in the housing market, schools, and the voting booth. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I will tell you one thing. Sharia law is incompatible with Article 6 of the Constitution. This shouldn't even be an argument. We're way past the point where we should even be arguing about this. It's not a First Amendment right. It's an Article 6 right issue. That the Constitution will be the supreme law of the land, and that there will be no other law that will have precedence over the Constitution. This is a total no-brainer. Sharia law is another law. The motto of the Muslim Brotherhood is that the Quran is our Constitution. It says it right in their motto. They're not shy about it. And dying in the way of Allah is our highest goal. This is the moderate organization that this administration allied with in the Middle East. And it's also the same moderate organization that allied with here in the United States, with groups like CARE and ISNA and NAIT and a whole bunch of other ones. And oddly, in my career, I picked the two groups, of all the groups that I could have picked to focus on, would get me in the most trouble. Muslim Brotherhood and Tablighi-Jamaat. Tablighi-Jamaat is the group that she alluded to earlier that had to do with the San Bernardino shooting, that very few people had heard of prior to San Bernardino, except for a few specialists inside the intelligence and subject matter expert field who did know. So then we come to 2008. Here's another huge turning point. This is the Countering Violent Extremism Working Group. Half the people on that were Muslim Brotherhood members. And two of them were not U.S. citizens. They were lawful permanent residents at the time that they were placed on the committee. Again, if you did this, you can't do this. And what's the big campaign you hear about all the time inside DHS? If you see something, say something. They don't tell you what they will do to you if you do say something. So this is another big turning point, because you've got to keep in mind, this is all, remember what I said, everything from about 3 slides back is post-Holy Land. They are without excuse. Because they know that these are individuals and organizations that they're forming alliances with to help create and promote and enforce not only domestic counterterrorism policy, but also foreign, are members of the Muslim Brotherhood. And as we go along, you're going to see how insistent they became on denying that fact. Here we are, May 10, right after the working group comes out, the term Islamic extremism was removed from the 210 National Security Strategy text. No more. Not just war on terror, anything to do with Islam, period, was taken out. It's like one of those movies where the people disappear off the photo. At the same time that these organizations are barging their way into the law enforcement and strategy policy decision-making process, they are also telling their own community not to cooperate with those very same organizations. That's psychosis. That's a craziness. Craziness that we didn't see it and stop it a long time ago. When they publicly post these posters on their websites telling them, remember what I told you? Build a wall of resistance. That means in Islamic terminology, stop fitna. Do not allow them to advance any further into your community. Meanwhile, we're going to cover you and we're going to keep pushing through the political system so that you become more and more and more immunized from law enforcement action. This one here, Intel Director James Clapper confused over Brotherhood aims. At the same time as that policy came out I referred to just a minute ago, James Clapper appeared before the committee that I just sped right over the top of, one of the Intel committees. He was one of the witnesses on that committee. That's when he made his infamous statement that the Muslim Brotherhood was a secular organization, that they didn't have any global plan, that they had eschewed violence. You're talking the highest level Director of National Intelligence sits in front of the American people and tells us that we have nothing to fear from a global organization whose vow is to die in the way of jihad. Now here's another thing. This is going to go macro. Now, what was the title of my talk? CVE goes global. This is where it started going global. This is UN Resolution 1618. Now we're merging into traffic with the global Islamic organization called the Organization of Islamic Conference, now called this Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where they are going to make defamation of Islam and criticism of Islam illegal on a global level. In other words, arrest people like me for pointing out things like operative verbs in the Quran. This is through the UN. This is April of 2011. So now we've gone 10 years in, and instead of protecting the country from the threat, we have colluded all the way up through past the administration level, clear into the UN. Because as you may or may not know, Hillary Clinton is the one that drove this whole process through the Istanbul process. She endorsed this and helped them and helped encourage them to pass it, and they did pass it. Now this I just put here. These are 5 different documents in chronological order that all have to do with the same concept of essentially criminalizing critical speech against Islam, defamation. Those are called slander laws. Ghiba in Arabic is a death sentence. It's a capital offense to criticize Islam. And now it has been sanitized politically and turned into a social political narrative, but it's going to have the same effect. It will become globally illegal to say anything negative about Islam unless we appeal to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which says that it is incumbent upon the citizenry when the government becomes tyrannical to change the government. Although we don't do it lightly, it says, but we are actually quite long-suffering. But when the time comes for us to do it, it's our responsibility to do it. I think everybody here knows that this is a turning point year. We all agree with that, right? This is a moment of history. This is one of the main cords in the rope of history right here. What I'm talking to you about tonight is the domestic and foreign policy vis-a-vis counterterrorism and/or, if you want to call it, countering violent extremism. President Biden says that the Taliban per se is not our enemy. I think those guys that are airlifting home tonight from Afghanistan, life-threatening injuries would probably disagree with this assessment, wouldn't you? I suspect that the people up on the top of the buildings in Benghazi would also disagree with an assessment like this if the Muslim Brotherhood are our friends and allies, when after all, they played a primary role in the whole Benghazi operation. FBI ditches training materials, criticizes anti-Muslim. Now we're in the year 212. I call it the year of the Great Purge. The year of the Great Purge actually started for me in '09. Because as Claire referred to when I started, they ordered me to scrub the information out of the records. That was clear back in 2009. That was a harbinger. I was a harbinger. Because I was a subject matter expert in the Muslim Brotherhood. And those were specifically the records they told me to scrub the information out. But just like yeast or the camel's nose, because it wasn't addressed, it metastasized into every single facet of the law enforcement community in the American government. And then they started wholesale purging information out of the training. And that's bad enough. That's a dark black hole of disinformation. But the problem is that they didn't put anything back to replace it. They just took it out. So it's a doubly corrosive policy. This here is 2013, and now they're doubling down on civil rights and civil liberties. All components should include DHS policy stated above, and it goes on and talks about use of information, but their emphasis is on Department of Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties should implement component-specific policy and procedures to implement this guidance for law enforcement. Like, what cop on earth understands what the heck they're talking about? These are bad guys. You cannot build cases on civil rights and civil liberties, subjective definitions that require literally greater than probable cause. Anybody else a cop in the room? Can you build a case? No, you have to have something less than probable cause to pull somebody over. Maybe a tail light or something. But the point is they're pushing it to the point where it makes it absolutely impossible to develop cases based on their definition of the primary overriding concern is civil rights and civil liberties, not law, not immigration law. And that's why you're seeing such a fiasco in the immigration world, because they're emphasizing CRCL, civil rights and civil liberties, over law. If we had a wall around America that was 20 feet high and 15 feet thick, would we be safe?
No.
Yes.
It wouldn't hurt, but would we be safe?
No.
And what's the reason why we wouldn't be safe?
Because they're not enforcing the law.
Well, that too. There's a lot of tactical reasons why, but the main reason is because the people are keeping the door are letting them in. It wouldn't matter how high and thick the wall is if the administration insists on letting them come through anyway. It's not actually about the physical border. It's about what's up here. It's the world view. And the very fact that we cannot secure our own border, and I mean that literally secure it in whatever way and means that it takes, is a fatal flaw in our world view. Like driving around with a blind spot in your mirror and insisting that you don't have a blind spot in your mirror. What's going to happen to you? You're going to crash. It's inevitable, right? We have a blind spot in our world view. The evidence of it is the border. But it goes all the way through every other kind of policy that we have, that fatal flaw, right up into global level foreign policy. The inability to recognize who our friends are and who our enemies are. When you go on vacation, or to the store for that matter, do you put a little blinking light on your front door, says door, and then leave your door open and come on over while I'm gone? Or if you're having an outbreak of burglaries in your community and you form a citizens committee, and tonight is your turn to go down with your coffee and your CD and do your civic duty, everything's fine, you come back to your house, but oops, you forgot one thing. What was that? You lock your own front door. And when you get back home, everything in your house is gone because you were down the street trying to help your neighbor. Attorney General Holder announces pilot program to counter violent extremists. He was true to his word. He did exactly what he said he would do in 2009. They put out guidelines to federal law enforcement officers that for the first time in history literally said you cannot use religion to develop cases. You cannot use it as a consideration. That was his legacy. When he left DOJ, he left this legacy behind. New federal guidelines for law enforcement officers. You cannot use religion as a basis for developing cases. And that's the reason why they shut the case down that I worked on at the National Targeting Center, because it was based on affiliation with a religious group. In this particular case, Tablighi Jamaat. The same group, the Darul Masjid that was in San Bernardino. Darul means house of knowledge. It's a brand name. When you go to McDonald's, you know exactly what kind of hamburger you're going to get. When you go to Darul, you know exactly what kind of teaching you're going to get. And Darul is a brand name school under the Deoband umbrella, the group from Asia, the Indian subcontinent. And there are Darul schools and mosques here in the United States. So I set up a case and I identified 67 individuals and or organizations affiliated with the Darul network in the United States because I had remembered what they said after the Abdul Muttalib underwear bombing. Congress was concerned about two things: failure to connect the dots and radicalization of U.S. citizens. Well, I put a case together that showed exactly how both were happening right here in the United States. Boys about in 4th and 5th grade are taken out of public school and are put in a parallel madrasa system right here in America. All they do is study the Quran and they become what is called Hafiz. They memorize the Quran. When you're 16 or 17 years old, usual graduation, they go to madrasas in South Africa. Why there? Because they teach in English and it's cheap. It costs about $1,200 a year. And they go through an Alim program, a 7-year program to become imams. And they come back to the United States and they take the place in their community as Alim. That's Darul. That's the masjid in San Bernardino. Those are the records. When I said on Megan and the other shows that they scrubbed the 67 records, that's the 67 records. That wasn't enough for them, by the way. Then they investigated me and accused me of misuse of the system. So on the left, you have the leftish side. You have a lot of support for the CVE policy. And then here's one of the weirdest things of all that happened. In the lead up to the Countering Violent Extremism Summit that was held in February of 15 at the White House, widely publicized event. Remember I mentioned earlier that they had these pilot communities? They had 3, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and Boston. Literally the day or 2 days before the conference in February of 2015 at the White House, every single one of the leaders of those 3 communities came out and publicly renounced the program. Said that it was stigmatizing, that it was prejudicial, that it was against Muslims. They all renounced it on the day before the summit in the White House. Now that's audacity. These people were working with this government in pilot programs to spin up this CVE thing, and on the literal day before the big show, they all came out publicly and renounced it. Why did they do that? Because of Quran 551. Don't be ansar fi al-mushrikin, or kufarin. Don't be friends or helpers with the unbelievers, because if you do, you become like them. That's another capital offense. It's forbidden for them to take help from non-believers. They had to reset the button. That's one reason why the group in Benghazi was called Ansar al-Sharia. the helpers or the promoters of Sharia. Not Ansar al-Kufarin, not helpers or getting help from the unbelievers, but promoters or helpers of Sharia law. It was, among many things at Benghazi, it was a global reset, at least in terms of the Islamic community. They had to demonstrate that they didn't take help from the West, they took it from themselves, so they took back that territory and called themselves Ansar al-Sharia. Words matter. They certainly do. Obama White House has refused to declare Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Now we're getting into real deep water at this point. This is 6 years past Holy Land. You've got hundreds of individuals and organizations affiliated with the North American network itself, Canada and United States. You got the Arab Spring and fire across the Middle East with the Muslim Brotherhood trying to push themselves into the political process across the Al-Maghreb, across North Africa, and we're sitting there saying that, no, they're peaceful. We've allied with them. And then there was a petition on the White House page. Remember when the administration first started, if you put 100,000 signatures on any petition, we'll step right up and address it?
Yeah.
Well, 200,000 people, 213 and 146, signed a petition on the White House website to designate the MB, the Muslim Brotherhood, as a terrorist organization. And what was their response to it? We don't see any evidence that they're violent. No evidence whatsoever. That's what it says down at the bottom. So now we're up in 14. Here's that guidance I told you about. This is Eric Holder's legacy to the law enforcement community, federal law enforcement community, regarding the use of race, ethnicity, gender, national origin, religion, and so on. First time in history, those terms were included in the guidelines for law enforcement officers. In the battle to defang ISIS, U.S. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective of what happens in the global level. Here, this is the top leader. We do not understand the movement, and until we do, we are not going to defeat it, he said, according to the confidential minutes of a conference call he held with the experts. We have not defeated the idea. We don't even understand the idea. This is our top leadership. This is December of 14. Well, how long ago is that? A year and a month? This is current news. This is the state of the intelligence community. We don't even know what the threat is or understand it when they tell you exactly what they intend to do. Here it is again. No Islamic terrorism or jihad, they're not mentioned even one time. You can't make this stuff up. We have these high-level individuals saying they have no clue what these people really believe, and at the same time we're putting out official product that won't even include anything of their doctrine. Like I said, it's like Albertson where the people have real guns, because it is really crazy. Imagine working inside of an administration like this. Here's the poster for the CVE conference in February of last year. Now here are the three examples I mentioned to you. Here's the one from Minnesota. Bigotry against Muslim breeds hate. Wait a minute, you've been cooperating with these, you're a Democrat, you've been cooperating with this administration demanding civil rights and civil liberties and CVE equality, and then when the conference actually comes out, you have the audacity to say in public that the program is bigoted and breeds hatred. These people are incredible. And here is the leader of the Boston one, Valley. The Boston place where the Boston bombing was, the Islamic Society of Boston with about 40 or 50 people with known derogatory information, with ties to Al-Qaeda and Hamas and every other bad group you can name, was chosen by this administration as a model community. And then on top of it, the very day before he actually is supposed to come to the White House, he stands up and renounces the program. But he really spilled the beans in the interview, if you know how to read between the lines, because after all, he said, if we were really violent, we wouldn't have been doing community workshop outreaches with all of the federal law enforcement organizations. I don't think he actually knew what he said, because he just revealed that everybody, FBI, DHS, you name it, was meeting at the ISB. And I'll tell you something that happened. 4 years before the Boston bombing, I had put in a large number of records on the ISB, the Islamic Society Boston, and its entire network, 118 different linked organizations and individuals, 4 years before the bombing. Would you like to guess how many people in the community queried the records to the ISB in the time between 09 and the bombing in 13? 0. Correct. Would you like to guess how many people queried those same records after the bombing? 0. Also 0. And how do I know that? Because these records have a little option, 0 or 1, just like computer stuff. You put a 1, it sends an email back to you. Every record that I ever created, when people looked at it, I got an email. That's how I know. Those are the records I deleted information from 4 years beforehand. And that's another reason why I became a whistleblower. Here's the other group from LA that did the same thing more. They just let them have it. Now here's my former boss, Jay Johnson, standing up and receiving an award from MPACT, founded by Muslim Brotherhood. MPACT, by the way, has been to the White House and involved in virtually every policy decision clear back to 1998. MPACT is the most consistent of all the groups. ISNA, CARE, all of them. MPACT is the one that's the most. And if I could give Jay Johnson a Vulcan mind meld and have him sit down in front of the computer, even he could find the derogatory information on these organizations that quick. So you tell me, what's the explanation? Countering violent extremism. It's a policy that they're so infatuated with that it has blinded them to the reality of the threat we face. Here's Mike McCall's bill, H.R. 2899. They're going to ask for $40 million to cement CVE right inside of DHS and carry this thing on even further. They did not name anything about Islam in the bill. And then when we go, same time, it's like they're handing baton from one to the next to the next. DHS Secretary will not describe ISIS as Islamic either. It is not a hijacking of Islamic doctrine. It is pure Islam from the 7th century. Calling Islamic terrorism Islamic offends Muslims. What about Americans? Not calling it Islamic terrorism, maybe that should offend Americans. Civil rights, here's more protesting about the CVE program. And then we're going to lead up to New York, which is just like, what, 3 or 4 months ago? CARE knew about this program before we did. And they sent an open letter to Bill de Blasio saying, we do not want New York City to participate in this pending announcement. Loretta Lynch said at the UN on the 29th of September that we're going to take CVE global through the UN. That's why my title is CVE Goes Global. And she announced it at the UN. CARE knew about it before the general public did and wrote a letter to Bill de Blasio saying don't participate in the program. And for once, I actually agree with them. He shouldn't. Now here is the launch of it, Strong Cities Network to strengthen community resilience against violent extremism. We have gone way off into the stratosphere here with this CRCL-based counterterrorism policy. That's from the DOJ. Remember what Holder said? We're going to robustly protect the civil rights and civil liberties of the Muslim community, and that we're going to prosecute anybody who violates those civil rights. Well, now it's gone global. Here's the announcement. The Obama administration and UN announced global police force. That's how they characterize it, to fight extremism in the U.S. So let me ask you a rhetorical question. If the Islamic community is insulated from charges of violent extremism, who does that leave?
Us.
The ones who point out. They have the audacity to point out that maybe they also are involved in violence. And that's why you saw the spin on San Bernardino. How has it been characterized? Was it characterized as a jihad attack by a group called Tablighi Jamaat?
No.
What was it? Gun violence, right? Countering violent extremism. That too. Of course, the imam there lied and said he didn't know. Did you know the imam's brother of the San Bernardino Mosque is currently the imam of the mosque in San Diego, where Anwar al-Awlaki was the imam? Not only that, that means the Tablighi Jamaat case in San Bernardino is tied directly to the Muslim Brotherhood through the fusion of individuals like that imam's brother. There's a fusion there. Why? Because the strategy and tactics are actually exactly the same. The strategy of the global Islamic movement is quite simple, as you could actually say it in one word: submit, which is what Islam means. A broader expansion of it is that Islam will prevail. Yakhatum, the art. In the earth it will prevail. That's the strategy of the global Islamic movement. Quite simple. Islam will prevail. What is complicated and kaleidoscopic are the tactics. Every group adopts a certain, it's like a buffet. All of us get a plate and there's a buffet in the back. We all have exactly the same choice, don't we? The choice doesn't change. But every one of our plates is going to look a little bit different, isn't it? It's the same with Islam. They have different tactical choices they can use. But it's actually the same dishes that are available for them to choose from. Those are those operative verbs that I referred to earlier. ISIS and Al-Qaeda does what I call the Godzilla tactic. They stomp on buildings and eat trains for lunch. Right? MB and other groups like Tablighi are what I call the snake under the door. They slither under the door, and when you don't even see it, they've already bit you. You're dead either way. And then you find out they're actually working on the same team. So more of what I was telling you about, and this is a little bit more about global stuff here. Over here it says that Putin proposes immunity for sacred texts. They cannot be judged extremists. If Quran is absolved from being a source of violent extremism, then again, who are the violent extremists? UK targets all extremism, not just Islamic. Muslims still enraged. Remember what I said, enough is never enough? They are going to push this CVE, they're going to stretch the CVE rubber band out as far as they possibly can. And the global community is buying into it. And we, through the UN, through Loretta Lynch and the DOJ, through the auspices of our former Secretary of State, are also cooperating in the same effort. Any questions?
I have trouble understanding, let's just follow the money and they're smearing it on Congress. I mean, a lot of us know some of what's going on in terms of how the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood is getting into Congress, the White House. You have these 82 congressmen that just proposed to, limit for... I mean, I don't get it. What's in it for these people? Don't they see what's going on? What is the motive? Thank you.
And what is actually motivating these people? It certainly isn't patriotism, is it? No. Yeah, I believe that I would like to quote something from Lincoln now. It's very apropos, and that is that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, but we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must act anew. We must think anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. We should stick with what we can do and what we do know, because the mystery of this is not probably ever going to be completely unveiled, at least in this world. But there are plenty of things that we can do. We have tools, we can use them. And then in that case, as we push forward into that, some of these answers will come to be. We'll begin to understand it. If I had become an advocate, I wouldn't have survived being investigated 9 times, having a grand jury from the DOJ, never knowing if the FBI was going to knock on my door, when I was going to get another email from Internal Affairs, CBP, whether or not the grand jury was going to find probable cause to put me in jail, living with that for month after month after month. For doing what? Exactly. For seeing something and saying something. For doing this. And now, the thing about it is, now the people that did it have a hook in their face. Just like when you go fishing, you get a hook stuck right in your face because they deleted the records. And it ties back to San Bernardino. There's no possible way they're going to be able to explain it. What was the reason that they did it? That's the reason that they did it. CRCL. But those people and the families of those 14 people who died are not going to accept that as an answer. Nor does history accept the fact that Mr. Schmitz, who's sitting on a street in Frankfurt in front of a pile of bricks that used to be his house, fortunate to have survived it at all, when somebody comes and said, "Didn't you know? Didn't you do something?" I knew nothing. Does history accept that? It won't accept it in this case either. I can't give micro answers. I can tell you that we are, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that we're Americans. We are capable. We have faced dark times before. I can't explain what happened to Representative McCall. I've talked to him face to face several times, literally. He even told me we need to protect you and we need to protect your information. So I cannot explain it.
Does he have broad support, or is he a
It hasn't come back to the floor.
We have 6 minutes.
I'd like to know what's going to be done to protect our civil liberties of this country when we're protecting the civil liberties of Muslims and illegals. That's one question. You're going to come back to it.
I can tell you in a general sense what it's going to take, and that is everybody here in this room to be involved. That's the only hope we have. If we depend on somebody else, quote unquote, to do it, it will never happen. It's going to be everyone here and everyone here like us that's going to have to do it. This is the time. This is the time. This is the generation. Every generation faces this. I'm only a harbinger. By the grace of God, I was able to endure it and survive it and retire honorably. But for a reason, to tell you that I'm a harbinger. If they can do it to people like me who are subject matter experts, then what do you think they're going to do to people that don't really know as much? So that's part of the answer. Start learning more about what's going on in the world.
Thank you very much, Bill. It really opened up our eyes to how much the camel has gotten into our tent. I can only say wow. Now, to reverse it, which you mentioned that this can be reversed, and through representatives who understand the nature of the threat, who understand our enemy and can speak out about our enemy without fear of political correctness or anything else, who would you say are those presidential candidates or representatives who understand who our enemy is and will not be compromised by what you point out is going on?
I honestly think that they're all on the learning curve right now. Some are a little further up than others, but they all need a lot better, improve a lot in terms of their grasp and understanding of the nature of the threat. But it's better than what we have, but still there's a lot of room for improvement. So I would say basically the top ones that everybody names that are in the game now are on a learning curve themselves, and just do your best to help.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Claire Lopez and Phil Haney for their work. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, it's my honor to introduce to you Phil Haney.
I picked that picture because that's how I felt a lot of the time in my service in the U.S. government. Right in the middle of a big storm. Now, we're going to go real fast through this, and don't worry about the detail. We can work on getting you a copy of it. But the point is, I picked one particular thing from each year, starting with 9/11/2001, to show you how this progression of what we call today countering violent extremism. Don't be shy. How many people have never heard of it? Good, most of us have, because that's the policy that drives not only domestic counterterrorism, but foreign policy as well. In foreign policy terms, it's usually called engagement in dialogue. Here in America, it's called CVE, but it's exactly the same policy. So starting in 2001, Ashcroft met with Muslim and Arab leaders, and the main concern they had was down at the bottom about their civil rights and civil liberties. Well, that's fine. We should all be concerned about civil rights and civil liberties. Except for, as you'll see as we go through, this civil rights and civil liberties policy didn't stop with just American citizens. Somewhere along the line it got extended to foreign nationals. And you heard a lot of that lately with the San Bernardino issues with the visa vetting and the visa wavering and the people coming and the people going. Well, it has to do with this. And you also remember with the social media. The big argument in the media a couple weeks ago about whether DHS had the right to examine social media, that was of people who were foreign nationals. Somewhere along the line, this administration extended American-style civil rights and civil liberties essentially to everybody on the face of the earth. So this is 2001. 2002, we have a joint Arab-American, Muslim-American statement. And in particular, there's a couple groups down here that are going to emerge out later. And again, apologize, you can't see it close. But the point is not the detail, it's the time sequence. These groups that were cooperating originally with the government subsequently became named in the Holy Land Foundation trial as direct affiliates of Hamas. We already knew in 2001 that Hamas was a terrorist organization and that these groups were affiliated with it. But it took a couple more years, actually a few more years, before they were officially designated as unindicted co-conspirators. 2003, we have the FBI director meeting with Muslim, Sikh, and Arab American leaders. And the way this progression works is like leaven in bread. It starts out with just a little bit, and all of a sudden the bread is getting bigger and bigger, and it just doesn't seem to ever stop, because enough is never enough. As soon as one concession is made, the famous saying, the nose of the camel under the tent, then the neck is in, and then the whole body, and it never stops. And that's what I'm showing you is the initial seeds, the very innocent-looking beginning. What's wrong with civil rights and civil liberties dialogue? But as you'll see, time goes on, it gets to the point where it doesn't seem like the government can tell the difference between its right hand and its left hand. And then people like myself who kept trying to say, wait a minute, this is not a good idea, these people are not our enemies, were pushed out. This is just another part of the same story. So then we come up to 4, Department of Justice.